Shabbas, Dafim Kuf Mem through Kuf Mem Vav. On Daf Kuf Mem, the Gemara discusses Kiskuse Kisnisa. This is a linen garment that was washed and it's stiff, and you rub it, you massage it to make it softer, to make it cleaner. You're allowed to do that on Shabbos. So the Gemara explains, it depends. It depends what his goal is. If his goal is to make it softer, that's okay. That's not a malacha. If his goal is to make it cleaner, lo lude chivra, to make it wider, brighter, and better looking, that's a form of cleaning, and that's awesome. The Gemara discusses the same thing regarding a sudra, another kind of garment. The halacha, though, the principle is clear that if the goal is cleaning, it's asur. If the goal is lo lude chivra, it's asur. The poskim struggle to explain. Here we say open and shut case, lo lude chivra, to clean it, to make it brighter and wider, is asur. Elsewhere, the Gemara discusses shaking dew or shaking other types of surface dirt off a garment. In some cases, it's actually mutter. The fact that you're cleaning the garment doesn't matter. Just shaking off the dirt is okay. In both cases, it's a form of cleaning that does not involve water or any detergent. Yet, in those cases of shaking off the dust or the dirt, it's sometimes mutter. Certain conditions are met, it's mutter. Here we say flat out, if the goal is la lude chivra, then it is asur. Mishnah Berurah explains the difference is that when you shake the dirt out, you're not really doing an act to the garment itself. You're just shaking off external dirt. You're not processing the garment itself. But in our Gemara, lude chivra, you're whitening it by rubbing, by processing the garment itself, even though there's no water, there's no detergent. It's asur. That's a form of malave, and any act that you do to process the garment itself and make it whiter is asur. The Mishnah Berurah repeatedly makes this point, repeatedly understands this Gemara, this din like this, and because of this, he has certain stringencies. One of them, an important one, is there's a Taz. The Taz is discussing a Gemara we're going to get to later in these dafim. The Gemara talks about getting mud off the surface of shoes. Post can talk about garments. So the post can talk about tochein, that if the mud is hard and solid and you crumble it, it could be tochein, grinding. We'll discuss that later. But the Taz says if it's not a problem of grinding, you're allowed to take the mud off the garment. You're allowed to even rub the mud out and clean with your hands, clean the garment from the mud. As long as there's no tochein, that is fine. Mishnah Berurah says that if this is a stain of mud, the Taz says if it's a stain, it's better because there's no tochein. It's just a stain. It's not a clump of actual mud. Mishnah Berurah says that's worse. If you actually rub out a stain, that's malavin. That's not worse than a lude chivra. It's not better than a lude chivra. Of course it's asur. You're cleaning. The whole discussion of mud is only when it's surface mud. It's not absorbed in the garment. It's just a piece of mud stuck to the garment. That's a question of tochein. But taking a stain of mud out, that's asur. That's a lude chivra. That's cleaning, even though there's no water and no detergent involved. Elsewhere, the Bir Halacha talks about an opinion of the Bahag. The Bahag talks about again dirt that was stuck to the surface of the garment, different types of stains that became stuck, and the Taz said, the Bahag says that if you peel it off, that's actually a form of malavin. So the Mishnah Berurah says, how is it different from mud? Mud, we just said, when you have a clump of mud, you're allowed to break it off. So the Mishnah Berurah explains the difference is, Bir Halacha explains the difference is, working within the same type of idea. In the case of the mud, it's mutter. That means a clump of mud fell on the garment. You're going to pull off the piece of mud that's stuck, the dirt that's stuck on the outside, but you leave the stain. The stain remains. So as long as the stain remains, you're not actually cleaning the garment because the stain is there. You just took off the surface mud. That's okay. The Bahag, who says that if you peel off this stuff, the Zarapishta and the flax seeds, that's called cleaning, that's asur. That's when peeling it off, he says, is going to pull out the stain also. The whole thing is one embedded stain. It has a surface component, that part that extends beyond the surface, a part that's absorbed in the garment. When you peel it off, the whole thing comes out. Again, that's asur. Maybe that's like a lude chivra. That's called cleaning. The only thing that's mutter, according to Mishnah Berurah, is when you take the surface stuff off, but you leave the stain in. Shalom falls on a garment. Contemporary posts can talk about kugel. You're allowed to pull off the beams and stuff that are sticking on the surface, that are sticking above the surface, but to actually rub out the stain and make the garment clean, that, according to the Mishnah Berurah, and that seems to be the consensus of all the contemporary poskim, that is absolutely asur. That's a prohibited form of cleaning on Shabbos. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara says, Rav Chisda says, kishta diarka, certain parts of the vegetable, if they are edible for animals, not edible to humans apparently, but if they're edible for animals, they're not muktzah, you're allowed to move them. If they're not edible for animals, then it is asur. This is how we paskin in Shulchan Aruch. We discussed this related in a previous Halachos of the Daf as well, discussions of bones and peels. So here the halacha is, if you have bones or you have peels, bones left over from meat or peels left over from fruits and vegetables, if they're edible, certainly for humans, even for animals, then they are not muktzah. You can clean them off. But if they're not edible, even by animals, then they're muktzah. You're not allowed to take them off the table. What do? You can shake them off the table. You can shake the table and knock them off. That's called tiltul min hatzad. We'll discuss that later in our share today. If there's bread on the table, then the table is considered both a basis for the both a basis for the bread and for the other thing. You can pick up the whole table and move it away because there's bread on the table as well. Because then the bottle to the bread. If you need the place of the table, then if you need the place where the table is, then even if the things are muktzah, you're allowed to take the whole table and move them away. That's tiltul min hatzad. That's tiltul min hatzad. We'll discuss soon the definition of tiltul min hatzad and when it's mutter. But basically the point of this is that if you have these byproducts of food that are not suitable even for animals, they are muktzah. Same thing applies for bones. Depends whether dogs can eat them or not. If they still have some meat on them, then they're not muktzah. But if they don't have meat and they're not edible even by animals, then they're muktzah. Shells of nuts and bones, things that are not edible at all, even by animals, are muktzah, and you have to have one of these heterim to be able to move them off the table. The Mishnah Berurah brings that this thing about bread, he says maybe, he's not sure, apparently, maybe even lechatchila you can put bread on the table in order to move the table away. But the upshot is that these basic things, these bones and stuff, are muktzah, the bones, the shells are muktzah, and you can't move them. Mishnah Berurah does bring an important heter. He says if there's a lot of them and they're revolting, they're mos, he says then you can even pick them up with your hands and move them away because we have the heter of graf shel rei, things which are gross and disgusting can be moved, they're not muktzah. People often do clean their tables off, removing garbage. A lot of the garbage is, again, at least suitable for animals, even humans sometimes. Absolute garbage, like nutshells that nobody can really eat, that's really muktzah. The only heter to pick them up with your hands would seem to be graf shel rei. The question is, what exactly is the standard of revolting and bothering you? So that's the Mishnah Berurah says that there is such a heter. Daf Kuf Mem Aleph, Mishnah talks about if there's straw on a bed, so you can't move the straw. Straw is muktzah, but you can move it with your body. You can use your body to smush it down, to move it where you want it to be. If it's edible for animals, and so on, then you can even move it with your hands. The Gemara discusses the idea of tiltul min hatzad. The Gemara discusses a radish. So if there's dirt on the radish, and by moving the radish you move the dirt, you want to eat the radish, you don't want the dirt, that's tiltul min hatzad. You're moving the dirt indirectly by moving the radish. The Gemara brings Rav Nachman said Asr, but we don't paskin like that. We paskin like the other shittas in the Gemara, like the Mishnah, that tiltul min hatzad, that the Brisa, the other shittas, not like Rav Nachman, that you're allowed to that the Gemara brings a Brisa that if you have the stuff on the bed that's muktzah, besides the ideas in the Mishnah of moving it with your body, it says if it's under a pillow or under if it's under a pillow or under, the Mishnah really says this, if the straw is on a pillow or something else, or a sheet, you can move the sheet or pillow to move the straw. That's tiltul min hatzad. As long as you're not handling the muktzah directly, that's tiltul min hatzad, and that is mutter. That's how we pass in the Shulchan Aruch, the radish case. In other cases, as we'll see, you're allowed to move muktzah indirectly as long as it is l'tzorech, as long as it's l'tzorech davar mutter, as long as it's for a mutter purpose to use the bed, that is considered tiltul min hatzad, l'tzorech davar mutter, and that is mutter. The radish doesn't become a basis for the dirt. That's something that supports the muktzah, because food, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Ramah says, foods do not become basis. This idea of tiltul begufo, however, moving the muktzah with your body, the Shulchan Aruch and most poskim paskin, that's a broader heter. You can move that even l'tzarach davar ha'aser. That tiltul with your body is not considered tiltul muktzah at all. Tiltul min hatzad, moving muktzah indirectly with your hand via the sheet or via something else, shaking the table, we said before, those types of cases are called tiltul min hatzad, indirect tiltul. It starts from your hand, but your hand reaches the muktzah through an intermediary. That's tiltul min hatzad. That's where certain restrictions. Has to be only l'tzarach davar mutter. But tiltul begufa with your body, the ikar lahalacha is mutter for any reason whatsoever. This comes up in the house a lot. You have a valuable muktzah item, you want to move it out of the way, you want to move it where it won't get damaged. Tiltul min hatzad would be asur, because that's tzarach davar ha'asur. It's for the sake of the muktzah. But tiltul with your body, with your foot, other parts of your body, that's mutter legamri. There is a Chazon Ish, the poskim bring. The Chazon Ish said no. The Chazon Ish paskin that Tiltul begufo is just the same as tiltul min hatzad. It also has the same restrictions. It's only mutter l'tzarat over a mutter, but most poskim don't paskin like that. Most poskim say tiltul begufo is mutter entirely. Some poskim still say you shouldn't do it for no reason at all, but assuming you have a reason, even if it's not a reason that would allow tiltul min hatzad, tiltul begufo is basically mutter for any reason whatsoever. We don't really have any real restrictions. However, tiltul min hatzad, as we noted, is only mutter l'tzarat over a mutter. For example, there's money on a chair. You want to sit down on the chair, you can take the chair and move the money away, shake the money off in order to sit in the chair. But if the purpose is to safeguard the money, that's tiltul min hatzad for the sake of the money, which is muktzah, and that you can't do at all. Some poskim say that tiltul min hatzad, even if it's not l'tzarat over a mutter, is okay if it is for kavod Shabbos. For example, Simcha Bunim Cohen in his muktzah book brings, you have dirt on the floor, or the nutshells, the other things we said before, you want to sweep them away with a broom, so the broom is, using a broom is tiltul min hatzad, and even though you're moving a davar ha'aser, and it's not, apparently this is not considered for tzarat davar mutter, you want the dirt out, that's apparently called tzarat davar ha'aser. Nevertheless, if it's for kavod Shabbos, some poskim say that's allowed. We mentioned earlier, a while back, the Rav poskim say that using anything which is an extension of your hand, like a knife or maybe a broom, is not tiltul min hatzad at all. It's considered yad ha'richta, a long hand, but other poskim say no, that whether it's a sheet or a blanket or a pillow or a chair or even a knife or a broom is all considered tiltul min hatzad. Some poskim say even using a broom to push away muktzah, even though it's for the sake of the muktzah, apparently to get the muktzah away, but for tzarech Shabbos, that's also a kavod Shabbos, that's also a heter. There's also Halachos, poskim debate also whether if you're moving muktzah for the sake of the muktzah to use the muktzah on Shabbos. For example, you have a candle. The candle's on a table. The candle's muktzah, but you can use it on Shabbos. You want to read by the candle in a way that it'll be mutter. So if you want to move the table, you want to move the table, assuming the table's not a basis, you want to move the table, which will indirectly move the candle. There's a machlokes whether that form of tiltul min hatzad, moving a non-basis table, which is a way of moving the candle min hatzad for the sake of using the candle, whether that's mutter or asa. But l'tzarat over a mutter is definitely mutter. These other cases are the subject of dispute. The Gemara brings, going back to the cleaning, discussing cleaning garments, the Gemara discusses if you have tit, you have mud on a garment, so you can rub it off by rubbing the inside of the garment, rubbing the edges together to shake it off, but not from the outside. That looks too much like cleaning. You can't rub it off directly with your hands on the outside, but you can scrape it off with a fingernail. We pass it in Shulchan Aruch. However, the Shulchan Aruch says you have to avoid toching. That's only if the mud is wet. If the mud is dry and hard, and by scraping it off, you're going to crumble it into pieces. That's toching. That's grinding. So scrubbing it off with your fingernail is not considered libun. Again, Shabbos is only because you're leaving some of the stain behind, we said before. And you can also use the back of a knife. Some say even the front of the knife. So you can't scrub it with a cloth, which is the derech of laundry, but you can scrape it off from the inside, or you can use your fingernail on the outside, or the back of a knife, or maybe even the front of the knife to scrape off the mud. Again, provided that you don't take the stain totally out. According to the Mishnah Berurah, the Taz allows it maybe, but the Mishnah Berurah says as long as the stain has to be left there, then it's only a question of tochen, then it's okay. Simcha Bunim Cohen, in his Shabbos home, gives a couple of exceptions, cases where tochen would not be a problem. Something that was already ground up before, there's a rule, ein tochen acher tochen, so if you had mashed potatoes, you don't have to worry about grinding it because it's already been mashed and pulverized. Similarly, if it's a food that doesn't grow from the ground, like eggs, then we also say ein tochen does not apply to such a food, so if you had eggs or meat or something like that, you'd be able to scrape it off and not worry about tochen. Again, you have to worry about malavein also, but assuming it's not malavein either, because you're leaving the stain on the clothing, and it's not tochen because it's not the type of food that's subject to tochen, you can scrape it off. On Daf Kuf Mem Beis, the new parak, Hanotel, starts on Kuf Mem Aleph, the Mishnah starts on Kuf Mem Aleph. The Mishnah said, a person can carry his child who's carrying a stone, and also there's a kalkala, a basket containing a stone, you can move the basket. So the Gemara says, how can you move the basket? The basket is a basis. If the stone was placed in the basket becomes a basis, a base for muktzah, becomes aser also. So the Gemara said, we're talking about a basket that has peros in it, it has food in it also. So the basket is a basis to heter and iser. Therefore, the basket does not become does not become a basis. It's basis leheter or leisser, and the heter is chashuv yoser. The paris are more important than the rock, and therefore there's no issue of basis. So you can move the basket. The Gemara asks, why? Why don't you just shake the rock out? So you won't have to move the basket. So even though you'll be moving the rock temporarily by moving the basket to shake it out, but it's better, apparently, the Gemara assumes, to just shake out the rock than to carry the basket around with the rock inside. So the Gemara says that we're talking about peiros that will get dirty and damaged if they fall on the floor. So you don't have to do that. You don't have to shake it out if that's what will happen. This is how we pass in Shulchan Aruch, that when you have something which is not a basis, and again, we're talking about tiltum and atzad, you're going to be moving the muktzah, the rock, via the basket, so that's mutter. However, if you could shake it out, if you could shake out the rock, it's better to do niyur, it's better to shake it out, even though it's tiltum and atzad, it's over a mutter, which is generally mutter, as we said before, but if you could shake it out and not have to carry around the muktzah, it's better to do that. If you can't shake it out because that will cause damage to the peiros, then you don't have to. Then we allow you to do the tiltum and atzad by carrying around the basket with the rock inside it. That's his mission. This is how we paskin in Shulchan Aruch. That if there's any way to do it that things won't get damaged, then you are supposed to do that. First. If you can shake either the peiros out, shake everything out, and then just put the peiros back in, they won't get damaged. Or if you can just shake the rock out and leave the peiros in either of those cases, you're supposed to do that rather than carry the basket around with the rock inside. This happens when you have stuff in your pockets. If you have muktzah in your pockets, you can argue that, again, wearing the clothing is just tiltum and atzad of the muktzah, but the point is that if you can shake it out, shake out the muktzah, then you're supposed to do so rather than carry around, I believe, the clothing, carrying around the muktzah, keeping carrying around the muktzah. The Shulchan Aruch also says that if you need the space where the basket is, you need to do something with that space, then we don't require you to spill it out, because you need that space. If you spill it out, you won't be able to use that space. So again, the rule is we don't require you to do niyur, to spill it out, if that'll cause some problem, either to the heter stuff in the basket or to the space that you need. But other than that, you should shake out the muktzah rather than carry it around. Mishnah further, next Mishnah also says, if there's a stone on top of a chavius, a barrel with a stone on top, you need stuff in the barrel, so you can just pour stuff out of the barrel, the stone falls off. Again, that's tiltum and atzad, and that's tzarek over a mutter. However, if we're in a place, first of all, it has to be, it's not a basis, because if it was put there deliberately, the whole barrel is muktzah, it's a basis. So the Gemara says, we're talking about shocheach, he accidentally left a stone on top of the barrel. The Gemara makes it sukimta twice, that you have to be talking about shocheach and not we left it deliberately, because then it would be a basis. So here you can move the barrel even though there's a stone on top of it. You're supposed to shake the stone off, but if you can't, because the stone will smash other barrels and cause problems, then you can just pick the barrel up and leave the stone on it and take it away, and where the stone won't cause damage. The same rules that tiltum and atzad l'tzarot over mutter is mutter. You should do niyur, you should shake it off first if you can. If you can't, because it'll cause damage, it'll cause problems, then you can go on being metaltal the muktzah via the heter as a form of tiltum and atzad. If you're worried about the muktzah itself, though, if you want to do tiltum and atzad for the sake of the muktzah, we already said you can't do that. And even niyur, even just shaking off the muktzah for the sake of the muktzah, you can't do that. You can't do any kind of tiltum and atzad if it's not for the sake of a heter. If it's only for the sake of the muktzah, then any kind of tiltum and atzad is asur. The question of basis, the Gemara says shocheach is a basis. If you forget, it's a basis. It's not a basis. It's only a basis if you deliberately put it there. Mishnah Berurah brings in Halachos, if you put it down during the week without a clear intention of how long it was supposed to stay. You put it down Friday morning or Thursday morning and you weren't sure how long it was going to stay there. You just, for now I want it there. I didn't think about what's going to happen on Shabbos. Then you just forgot about it, and now on Shabbos, Mishnah Berurah brings a machlokes about this between Trumas Hadeshin and Beis Yosef. Simcha ben Cohen says in his Muktzah book that the Mishnah Berurah doesn't decide it, but since Muktzah is Drabanan, you can be lenient that even in such a case, when you put it down there deliberately, and you wanted it to be there for some indefinite period of time, and then you forgot about it, even that's mutter, that's not called basis, that's included in shocheach. And the rule is that if it was put there, if you forgot it there, it's not a basis. If someone else put it on top of your thing, it does not become a basis. I can't make somebody else's thing a basis. However, the Mishnah Berurah says, after Shulchan Aruch says, the Mishnah Berurah says that if it's for the benefit of the person, that if the person who put it there thought it was for your benefit, and it is for your benefit, if that's something that people would generally consider a good idea, something you would want, then for example, you have a lamp that's dripping, someone puts a keli underneath to catch the oil and become a basis, even though it wasn't the person whose lamp it is. Most people would want that during the week. That does become a basis, the post can say, and then you should, and then even though somebody else did it, the thing becomes a basis, you cannot move it. Daf Kuf Mem Gimel, the Mishnah says you can't squeeze out peros, you can't squeeze out fruit to get the liquids out. If the liquid comes out by itself, the Tanakama says aser. Rabbi Yehuda says it depends what the fruit's purpose was. If the fruits were there for juicing, for making into juice, then if the liquid comes out, it's aser, even if it happened by itself, b'diavad. But if the fruits were meant for eating and liquid oozed out by itself, then that liquid is mutter. This is the beginning of a long sugya on squeezing fruits. This first Mishnah, the Gemara explains, there are actually three cases. There are three categories of fruits and vegetables. This is how we paskin. Zeisim va'anavim, the Gemara later is going to say that schita there is deraisa, because they're olives and grapes. Their primary purpose is for making oil and wine. There, if you do the schita yourself on Shabbos, that would be deraisa. That's mefarek. It's squeezing the juice out of the fruit as a form of the dash of mefarek. That's malacha deraisa, and that's why if the liquid comes out by itself, midrabanan, they prohibited it. Gzeira, you might come to do the malacha deraisa of squeezing it out. The middle category of fruits are tusim v'rimonim, pomegranates and berries, which are not usually used for juice, but some people make juice out of it. That's where Rabbi Yehuda has his distinction of depends why they're there. You're certainly not allowed to squeeze them. If the liquid came out by itself, then it depends if those particular fruits were there for juicing or there for eating. If they're there for juicing, then even b'diavad, it's going to be aser because of gzeira. It's like zeisim v'anavim, but if they're there for eating, then there's no gzeira, then the juice is mutter. The third category is other types of peros. They're not used for juice by anybody, that nobody makes juice out of. Then, if the liquid comes out, then it is mutter b'diavad entirely. And not only that, but you're actually allowed to squeeze those fruits. L'chatchila, if you have a fruit, cantaloupe, something. Again, today almost any fruit, we'll discuss this soon, but today almost any fruit, you can think somebody juices it, but if you have a fruit or a vegetable that nobody juices, you're even allowed, l'chatchila, to squeeze it on Shabbos and squeeze out some juice if you, for some reason, want some juice. Those are the three categories. Olives and grapes, schita is daraisa, and even b'diavad, the juice that comes out is aser, gzeira. The middle category, berries and pomegranates that are sometimes juiced, you certainly can't do it, b'drabanan, you can't squeeze it out at all, l'chatchila. B'diavad, it depends why they were there, for juice or for eating. Other types of fruits which are never juiced, you're even allowed to squeeze l'chatchila. The Ramah does add, though, that even fruits that are not generally juiced, the Chazal said were mutter entirely, but if you're in a place where they do squeeze those fruits, in your place they do make cantaloupe juice, then they have the halacha of berries and pomegranates, and you certainly can't do it l'chatchila, and even b'diavad in some cases it's awesome, but you certainly can't do it l'chatchila. The Ramah implies that only in that place. If most of the world doesn't squeeze these fruits, but one place does, in that place it is aser. The Mishnah Berurah says, although that's the Magen Avraham, that's apparently the Ramah's position, he says the Magen Avraham disagrees. The Magen Avraham says that once there's some place that juices a certain kind of fruit, then everyone is not allowed to squeeze those fruits. Even the Ramah would agree that if those fruits are exported from the place, it's aser everywhere. But the Magen Avraham says it doesn't matter if it's exported, as long as one place juices it, and then those fruits are aser for everyone. Mishnah Berurah gives various examples. The Achronim bring pears, agasim, bernis, and Ashkenaz. You're not allowed to squeeze them because in Germany, he says, they used to squeeze those pears. Apples. Mishnah Berurah talks about apples, so he says that today apples are like berries. People do squeeze apples. In the Bir Halacha, he brings it's actually machlokes. He says that there are some poskim who said that there are some poskim who say that apples are aser. He says there are some poskim. The Gaon is mashma that apples are mutter. That apples are like other fruits that are mutter entirely. But the Beis Yosef says apples are aser. The Taz says apples are aser. He says the Taz and the Beis Yosef both say that apples are mutter. But the Taz and the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, both say apples are are mutter. They're like other types of fruits, but the Beis Yosef already said that apples are aser. They're like the middle category of berries, so they're aser to squeeze lechatchila. The Chayadim, who was a generation after the Gaon and typically followed the Gaon, but the Chayadim says that today in Ashkenaz, they make tons of apple juice or cider or something. They make thousands of barrels full of it. They're certainly like the middle category of Tusim V'Rimonim. It's aser to squeeze apples. And this is that's Mishnah Berurah's conclusion, and this is in general what the poskim say, that you can't just look at what poskim said hundreds of years ago. You have to look at whether today certain types of fruits are squeezed or not by at least some people. Today, I think, with the juicing craze, almost everything is squeezed by somebody, so everything is likely to be aser because at least some people squeeze those types of fruits or vegetables. On Daf Kufam Daled, continuing in this sugya of squeezing, the Gemara brings that even grapes, even a cluster of grapes, there is one heter to squeeze them. You're allowed to squeeze them into a kedera, into a pot of food, but not l'toch ha'ka'ara, not into a plate in terms of an empty vessel. That's what we pass in Shulchan Aruch, that if the kedera has food in it, you're allowed to squeeze it into the pot. You're allowed to squeeze grapes into a pot of food, but not into an empty pot. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, the Halachos explains that it doesn't really depend whether it's a pot or a bowl, like the Gemara's language of kedera and kara. It's lav dafka. It really depends on whether it's into food or not. A pot typically has food, so you're allowed to squeeze it into the pot. The kara often doesn't have food. It's lav dafka, but it all depends on whether you're squeezing it into food or not into food. Into food is mutter. Squeezing it into an empty vessel is aser. There is mashmos. The Rashi says that in a kara, it's always aser even into food, but most of the poskim don't go like that. The ikar halacha is squeezing it into food is mutter. Squeezing it into an empty vessel is aser. The Mishnah Berurah explains, when you squeeze it into an empty vessel, it's aser. Even if you plan on subsequently transferring it to food, you want to take some juice, squeeze it into a cup, and then pour it into the pot. Doesn't matter, that's still aser because its first stop is into an empty vessel. That is aser. You can't do that. Why is it mutter? What's this heter of squeezing the grapes? Grapes is malacha deraisa normally. Why is it mutter to squeeze into food? So the Mishnah Berurah says the malacha is mafarik, is squeezing something out of its part that you don't want. That's only when you actually want the product as liquid, because then you're taking liquid out of solid. But here, when you're squeezing it into food, it's like food and food. You have grapes, then you have cholent. You're squeezing grape juice into your cholent, wherever the grape juice would be good for the food. That's considered food and food, so that's not considered mafarik. That's not the malacha. Rabbi Cohen gives various examples. He says, Mishnah Berurah also adds, you're not allowed to squeeze liquid into another liquid. You're allowed to squeeze liquid into food, but you're not allowed to squeeze a fruit and have the liquid fall into a cup of water. Rabbi Simcha Bonim Cohen gives various examples of these rules. He says, you're allowed to squeeze liquid into salad. Provided either the liquid is being used to flavor the food or it's being absorbed in the food. So you're allowed to squeeze lemon juice onto fish. You're not allowed to squeeze lemon juice into tea because you can't put it into liquid. You are allowed to squeeze the juice into sugar though. You're allowed to squeeze lemon juice into sugar and then put the sugar into the tea. There are opinions that say you can't do that, that even though we said before, if the first stop is empty, it's aser. Some poskim apparently are machmer in the reverse also. They say even if the first stop is sugar, if the second stop is liquid, it's also aser. Apparently you get hit both ways. Both the first stop has to be okay, and the second stop has to be okay. And if it's ending up in a glass of tea, that's considered liquid into liquid. That's also aser. But other poskim say it doesn't matter. That again, you only look at the first stop. As long as the first stop is into sugar, then it is okay. Making lemon juice, he says, making lemonade. You can't squeeze lemons into water on Shabbos. Again, because today lemons are considered in the category of fruits that some people squeeze. So you can't squeeze lemons into water, but you're allowed to squeeze lemons into sugar, and then put the sugar with lemon juice into the water. When you eat grapefruits, he says, you can't squeeze the grapefruit to pull out some juice. You can't take a spoon and squish the grape juice and squeeze out juice. That's aser, because some people squeeze grapefruits. However, if the juice comes out accidentally, then since the grapefruit, as long as the grapefruit was purchased for eating, we said before, the middle category, which is most fruits except for grapes and olives, if the fruit's destiny in this context is for eating and the juice came out by itself, then the juice may be consumed. But if you had a juicing grapefruit and some juice came out by itself, then you would not be allowed to use that juice on Shabbos. The Gemara goes on, and Daf Kufman Hey talks more about squeezing. So it says, kvashim and shlakos, vegetables that were pickled or preserved, and now they're full of liquid that came from the from liquids, vinegar or shlachos that were cooked in water, so the vegetables or fruits are now full of liquid that they absorb. So the Gemara brings different shitas about squeezing these products, whether it's legufan because the fruit or vegetable is better without all that water, or lemehen because you want the liquid, that's obviously worse. The Gemara brings different opinions. We paskin legufan, you don't want the liquid at all. You just it's too watery, and you want to squeeze out the water because it tastes better when it's dried out a little bit. So that is okay. That's okay. Even if you're putting the water into a bowl, an empty bowl, you're going to have the liquid. It doesn't matter. That's not your goal. Your goal is to improve the food, and that is okay. However, if you want the liquid, then it's only mutter. Like before, if you squeeze it into a food, that's always mutter. Even by grapes, then that's mutter. But you're not allowed. If you want the liquid, you're not allowed to squeeze it into an empty vessel. Here, the Shulchan Aruch brings that there is a sheet of Rabbeinu Hananel who actually doesn't paskin the heter of squeezing liquids into food. He paskins that with grapes, you squeeze it into food. It's asur, it's chayav, v'chatas. But the poskim say we don't paskin like that. We paskin that squeezing into food is always mutter. Nevertheless, the Mishnah Berurah does bring that even when it comes to squeezing into food, if you're squeezing actual grapes, things that could be schita daraisa, the Mishnah Berurah does bring that there are some poskim who are machmer like the Rach, and therefore he says a machmer tavo la bracha, that at least with regard to grapes and olives, you shouldn't squeeze them out even into food. But these other types of fruits that just absorb liquid, external liquid, then you're allowed to squeeze them out even into an empty vessel if you want to eat them, because it improves the quality of the food. Squeezing, if it doesn't improve the quality, if you want the liquid, then it's only mutter if you're squeezing it into food. And apparently there's no reason to be machmer. If it's not grapes and olives, then you don't have to be machmer at all for the sheet of the rach, and you can just, and that's fine if squeezing it into food. So the examples of this post can talk about are if you have a kugel or lakshin, noodles that have too much water, squeezing them out to make them drier and tastier, they're better that way, that is fine, that you're allowed to do. The Mishnah Berurah brings that's mutter even into an empty bowl. You can squeeze out the liquid if it improves the food. However, it's only if you want the food for Shabbos, or if you're preparing for Matzah Shabbos, you're not allowed to. One would assume that's the general prohibition of Achana. You're not supposed to prepare in general for after Shabbos on Shabbos. However, some posts can bring, Simcha Buddha Cohen brings that there's an issue of borer here. If you're squeezing out liquid from the noodles or from the kugel, then that's actually a question of borer, and you're squeezing out liquid from salad, and that's only mutter if it's considered immediate, for immediate use. So it wouldn't just be for after Shabbos, it'd have to be right before the meal. We discussed in other contexts what's right before, an hour before, a half hour before, but then you would have to do it right away to avoid the question of borer. The Gemara goes on, the Gemara finally brings the statement, Dvar Torah, biblical schita, biblical mafarik only applies to grapes and olives, again, because those are fruits that are generally used for squeezing and getting liquid. That's considered their ideal use. All other types of fruits, the schita is only drabanan, and we certainly have more leniencies with regard to the isser draban. The Mishnah, a very important Mishnah for the laws of Bishul, the Mishnah says anything that was ba b'chamin, that was in hot water, literal hot water, on Erev Shabbos, you're allowed to soak it in hot water on Shabbos. Anything that was not in hot water before Shabbos, you're allowed to wash it with hot water on Shabbos, but you're not allowed to actually place it into a bowl of hot water on Shabbos, a pot of hot water on Shabbos, except for old salted fish and certain small types of salted fish, different types of fish, where even hadacha, even rinsing with water, hot water, the poskim say on Shabbos, is considered a gemar malacha, a form of bishul, and that's usher even to rinse. This mission is basically telling us the fundamental rule of ein bishul achar bishul, something that was already cooked before Shabbos may be placed in hot water on Shabbos because ein bishul achar bishul. But if it was not cooked before Shabbos, then generally you cannot put it in hot water on Shabbos because then that's bishul. That's a problem of bishul. Shulchan Aruch Paskins is a distinction between liquid foods and solid foods. Liquid foods always have bishul achar bishul if they're in standing, if they cooled off. Solid foods, even if they cooled off, that's our mission of the ein bishul achar bishul. So liquid foods also have ein bishul achar bishul if they're still hot. But solid foods never have bishul achar bishul. Even if they cooled off, there is ein bishul achar bishul. and then you're allowed to put that into a kli rishon. And when the Mishnah says shara nosa b'chamin b'Shabbos, you're allowed to put it into hot water. That means even hot water in a kli rishon. However, not a kli rishon on the fire. That is still usher even if it was cooked before Shabbos. If it was something that was not cooked before Shabbos, you cannot put it into a hot keli on Shabbos. You cannot put it, certainly not into a kli rishon, because that would be bishul. You cannot even put it into a kli sheni, the Mishnah Berurah says, because that is mechzik mavashel. That looks like bishul. Even though kli sheni is not mavashel, if it wasn't yet cooked, you can't even put it into a kli sheni on Shabbos. The only thing you can do, the Mishnah says, is madichin. You can wash it with hot water on Shabbos. What does madichin mean? That means you pour water from a kli sheni. You can't pour water from a kli rishon, from a pot that was originally on the fire, because we pass in kli rishon is mavashel, at least k'nei klipa. Even iri kli rishon, even pouring from a kli rishon is mavashel a little bit. So if the food really wasn't cooked before Shabbos, you can't even pour from a kli rishon. So you can't put it in a kli rishon, you can't pour from a kli rishon, you can't even put it in a kli sheni because that's mechzik mavashel. All you can do is madichan, you can pour from a kli sheni onto such a food. So the rule is, if it was cooked before Shabbos, and it's solid, so it's no liquids, even if it's cold entirely now, or if it's liquid and it's still hot, you can even put it into a kli rishon because there's no bishul because it was already cooked. But if it's not cooked, you can't put it into a kli rishon. You can't even put it into a kli sheni because that's mexikim mavashel. You can't pour water from a kli rishon on it because that's mavashel k'lei klipa. A little bit it's mavashel. The only thing you can do is you can pour onto it from a kli sheni. That's much. Certain foods, the moliach hayashin, these types of fish and certain types of foods, you can't even pour from a kli sheni. As long as they're hot, you can't pour from a hot kli sheni. You can put cold water on it because that's not bishul, that's not anything. There's no issur in making food edible as long as you're not using hot water. But if it is hot water, then you can't pour into these types of substances which can be made edible by hot water. That you can't do. That's considered Gemara Malacha, and that you cannot do. On Daf Kuf Mem Vav, the Mishnah says we have a Mishnah and a string of statements in the Gemara which are crucially important for the very common question, a whole family of questions about opening different types of bottles and cans and juice cartons and Shabbos. This half an amud of Gemara, the Mishnah in Gemara, contains many of the key halachos, the key principles that crucial to understanding the laws of opening cans and other types of containers. The Mishnah first says you have a chavius, you have a barrel, you're allowed to break the barrel, just smash the barrel to get to the food inside. As long as you're not mechaber to make a keli, as long as you don't break it in such a way that fashions a keli out of it, that's fine. So Tosfos asks, really, you're allowed to break a barrel to get the food inside? He brings other Gemaras, you're not allowed to break barrels to get food inside. So Tosfos struggles with this question. Tosfos' conclusion is that in general you are not allowed to break barrels, even though the Gemara says ein binyan b'kelim, ein stira b'kelim, that's a limited halacha. In general, you are not allowed to smash an ordinary keli. However, our Mishnah that says you're allowed to break the barrel is talking about mustaki. It's talking about not a real proper keli. It's a keli that's just made of stuff stuck together. It's a very flimsy and half-baked kind of keli. That's the keli the Mishnah is talking about that you're allowed to break. But a real keli, you're not allowed to break, even to get to the food. That is the opinion of Tosfos. Other Rishonim say no. Other Rishonim say when the Gemara says in various places in Shas, ein binyan b'kelim, ein stira b'kelim, the malachas of binyan and stira do not apply to kelim. They only apply to houses and structures attached to the ground. That means exactly what it says. There is no malacha of binyan or stira applied to kelim. Our Mishnah should be understood at face value. You're allowed to break any barrel in the world, the most solid, expensive, nice barrel. As long as you're breaking it, you can break it. There's no din of binyan b'kelim. Making a barrel would be makar patish, but breaking a barrel is not a malacha at all. This is a major machlokes rishonim. How do we paskin? Shulchan Aruch paskins l'chumra like Tosfos, ein binyan is dir b'kelim, but only when the keli is not a real keli, like a chavius, which is broken and was stuck together with glue, so it's not really a durable, serious keli. It's a very tenuous keli to begin with. That's what we say in binyan b'kelim. That's what our Mishnah is talking about. But breaking a proper keli is going to be asur. Shulchan Aruch paskins l'chumra. However, there are poskim who are lenient. The Karban Saddle wonders why the Shulchan Aruch is so strict, and the Gaon agrees with the poskim that the lenient view, the Rif and the Rambam, that there's no binyan b'kelim at all. So this is a major machlokus whether smashing an ordinary keli is mutter or not on Shabbos. We paskin l'chumra. but it's not so simple, as we'll see, and therefore there's some grounds for leniency when it comes to opening cans and bottles, as we'll discuss presently. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara brings a brisa. The brisa says choslos. Choslos are another kind of keli, another kind of utensil. They contain figs or dates. You're allowed to just tear them apart. Again, you're allowed to destroy them to get to the food inside. What is that all about? We pass them that way in Shulchan Aruch also. What is that all about? So the Shulchan Aruch says breaking these choslos, breaking these woven basketwork type of utensils to get to the food inside is like breaking nutshells, is like smashing a nutshell, smashing the peel of a food item to get to the food inside. Why isn't that stira b'kelim? So again, Mishnah Berurah explains once again these are not kelim gemurim, not because these are just half baked because they're glued together, they're already smashed, they're just you have the pieces glued together. These are not kelim for a different reason, because these kelim are temporary. They're only made for ripening dates. They aren't used in a full-blown way. So these are also considered not full kalim, and therefore also you're allowed to smash these kalim as well, because these again are not considered real kalim. Here we see an additional point that even though these are not just broken pieces of kalim glued together, these are real kalim that were made by woven basketwork, reeds, or things like that, it's still mutter, because since they aren't designed as versatile kalim that are used for a variety of purposes, they just have one narrow specific purpose, they're also considered not real kalim. Once again, we have a heter which is going to help us in the case of the bottles, that these are that certain types of kalim, it's not the same thing as just breaking your cooking pan. Certain types of kalim are considered inferior kalim, and we say ein stira b'kalim. The Gemara then talks about chopping the heads off barrels. The Gemara says it depends whether you're making a pesach, making holes in the top of the barrel, the side of the barrel. The Gemara talks about. The Gemara again discusses whether you're doing it to make a pesach. Making a pesach is asur. Making a hole, a spout, a means of extracting the contents of a vessel, that's a form of makabeh patish, of making something useful, making a keli usable. If that's not your intention, if your intention is not to make any particular spout, that's mutter. The Gemara goes through a number of different technical variations on this. But here the Gemara tells us a chumrah that even if you're not destroying or making a keli, if you're making a spout, the pesach in a keli, that itself is a problem on Shabbos. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara brings another brisa that says you can't make holes in kelim. And it says that machlokas, can you add to a hole? So that's machlokas, whether mosifin or ein mosifin. Shulchan Aruch passes you cannot make a hole in a keli. Even if it has a hole, you can't make a wider hole. Making holes, if that's your intention, is also awesome. So as we noted, when poskim discuss opening cans and opening bottles, there are a variety of concerns involved. There's destroying the keli. If you have the keli and you just tear it open and you break it, that might be destroying a keli. If you open the cap and now the ring comes off, or the expands and now it becomes usable as a cap, maybe that's making a keli. Maybe you're making a pesach in some cases if you open the carton or if you open the can in a way that it has a spout. There are other isurim sometimes. Korea, tearing can apply to certain types of materials. So there are a variety of different isurim, but focusing on the question of soser, if you destroy the keli, or if you, or the question of making a spout, metal cans, for example, opening cans of vegetables, cans of preserved fruits. So are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? So extensive discussion by 20th century poskim. As Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen explains, he says that the question is, why isn't it stira? If you break the can and destroy it, why isn't that a form of stira? Some poskim say again, we had shovres achavias, you can break the barrel, but poskim say that's only mustaki, that's only a barrel made of glued pieces together. On the other hand, we had choslos. We had the case of these baskets, which are in full-blown kalim, are just used for ripening certain fruits. That's not considered a full-fledged kalim. So some poskim suggest that that kalim which are disposable, the cans, are not meant to be kept and saved and used for the future. Some poskim want to argue that that's really like choslos, so that's not considered a full-blown keli, and therefore there's no isser of stira when applying to such kalim, because they're disposable. Even if you could theoretically keep them, but they're meant to be disposable. What about the isser of making the spouts? Of when you open the can, you make a nice hole to pour it out. Certainly the soda can, you pull up the tab. Maybe you're making spouts. That's also an issue. So that could be makabeh patish. So again, some poskim suggest that's only when, or some Rabbanon Cohen suggests that's only when the keli is going to have an ongoing use, that you're going to save the food in it, and even if you're going to empty it out, maybe you can say it's usher because you could keep the food in it. But you can say that if you can say if you're going to throw it away, you're not going to save it, and it's not really a Pesach. You're just taking out the food. Particularly, he says, what he recommends is for opening cans. Some folks can recommend you not do it at all. You avoid the whole question. But if you can open the can, he says, open the can halfway. Then you can't really. It's not really usable in that halfway stage. You're not really fixing the kli. It's not makav patish. The question of stira doesn't really apply. We already said because they're disposable. That's the basis for leniency in the case of cans. Post can discuss extensively other questions, bottles and juice cartons and so on. But the Gemaras here are at the root of these questions. Mishnah says if someone's clothing became soaked in water, he's allowed to keep walking. He doesn't have to worry about schita, about squeezing them out. Doesn't have to worry about anything. When he gets inside, once he's allowed to take them off, he can put them in the sun to dry. But he should not put them in a place where they'll be visible to the public because of Maras Ayin. People will think that he laundered his clothes. That's why they're wet. He laundered them on Shabbos by putting them out to dry in a public place. People will be choshed him that he did a malacha of laundry on Shabbos. The Gemara asks a question. The Gemara says, why can you do it even privately? The Mishnah says you can't do it in public, but privately you could. Why can you do it privately? The usual rule is anything usher because of Maras Ayin is usher even privately. The Gemara says it's machlokes. Indeed, it's machlokes. We actually paskin l'chumra. We paskin that you're not allowed to put out wet clothes to dry because of Maras Ayin. People will be choshed that you wash them on Shabbos. Even inside you can't put them out because we paskin the Maras Ayin is usher even b'chadrei chadar. However, if you hang them up on Erev Shabbos, you hang up your laundry on Erev Shabbos, you're allowed to leave the laundry up. You don't have to worry that people are going to say, oh, his laundry's hanging there. I guess he did laundry on Shabbos. It's only if you actually hang the laundry up on Shabbos. Mishnah Berurah explains that if people see you hanging them up, they're not going to think you did the laundry Erev Shabbos, because if you did, why are you waiting till now to hang them up? They're not going to say you're so busy Erev Shabbos, you waited for Shabbos. They're going to say he's putting them up now, and to hang them up must be he did the laundry now. But if they see the laundry there, they don't see him actually putting them up, they'll realize he put them up before Shabbos. But you're not allowed to hang the laundry up, not in a public place, not even in a private place, because of Maras Ayin. Maras Ayin is usher, even in private. Mishnah Berurah brings a leniency. This kind of isser of Maras Ayin is only if the isser that they're going to suspect you of doing is an isser daraisa, like doing laundry is an isser daraisa. But if they're going to suspect you of at most an isser drabanan, then there's no isser if it is in private. So if it's in private and the isser at worst is only isser drabanan, Mishnah Berurah says it's mutter. He said the Rav Poskim would disagree. The Rav Poskim would say that even if it's an isser drabanan, it's usher even b'chadrei chadarim, even in private. But he says there are two grounds for leniency. First of all, some poskim say don't paskin like Rav at all. Some poskim paskin that Maras Ayin does not apply in private at all. Even though you can't be samech on that, he says, because many Rishonim paskin l'chumra like Rav that even b'chadrei chadarim it's usher. But also you have this other opinion of some Rishonim that Maras Ayin only applies to an isser daraisa. Therefore, if you have both factors together, so you have two different sets of shitas to rely on, two different sets of poskim to rely on, those who say Maras Ayin doesn't apply at all b'chadrei chadarim, and those who say that it doesn't apply isser drabanan, you can be lenient in private when the isser involved, when the potential isser that you'll be suspected of is only an isser midrabanan. Mishnah Berurah elsewhere adds a leniency. He says this isser is only if you're hanging in a place where it's normal to hang it, where people suspect you of doing laundry. However, if you hang it in a way that's not the way people typically hang laundry, they won't suspect you of hanging laundry, so therefore it is mutter. Contemporary posts can have all kinds of leniencies based on these points. Rabbi Ribiat in his 39 Halachos book, he says you can't hang your wet clothes on a clothesline or in the laundry room or in the bathroom over the shower, because those are all places where people hang wet clothing. However, you can hang it in a closet or just on a hook on the wall, because people don't hang up wet laundry in those places. So nobody will suspect you of having done your laundry. You can put it on the back of a chair or on a door or on a doorknob. That's not where people hang laundry, so nobody will suspect you of having done your laundry on Shabbos. He brings machlokas about dry clean clothes. Dry clean clothes, you don't put in the laundry. Nobody's going to suspect you of having your own dry cleaning at home. So if your suit gets soaked in the rain and you put your suit even on the clothesline, nobody's going to say, I guess he washed his suit. You don't wash suits. The some posts can say that that's okay. There's no Maras Ayin. Similarly with regard to women's clothing, which are typically dry cleaned. So again, there'd be basis to say, some posts can say that there's no Maras Ayin there because nobody will think you did the laundry on Shabbos. Other posts are more stringent, he says, so there is basis for stringency. But he says most posts can say that if the type of clothing is such that it's not typically washed on Shabbos, you don't have to worry. You can hang it up to dry. A raincoat, he says. You can hang up a raincoat on Shabbos because everyone knows that raincoats are in the rain and they get wet. So people understand that the raincoat it wasn't laundered, it's just being hung up from the rain. So a raincoat, he says, you can hang up on Shabbos. Wet clothing is ordinarily muktzah. And the Chacham said, if you get caught in the rain, the Mishnah said, if you get caught in the rain, then you don't have to worry. You can keep wearing the clothing. You don't have to take it off. You could even put on wet clothing if a person has no other clothing. The Mishnah Berurah already said this. The Mishnah Berurah said, you don't have to take off your clothing. He said, but if the Mishnah Berurah said that you can even put them on lechatchila, but only if it's mistaber. He said only if you have no other clothes. If you have other clothes, and you shouldn't rely on this heter. You shouldn't use the heter Chazal gave you. Chazal didn't give you the heter in that case of wearing the wet clothes. But if you have no other clothes, you're outside, you're wearing your wet clothes, you don't have to worry about muktzah. You don't have to worry about schita. When you step, your socks go squish, and your clothes get squished because it's not your intention. You're oblivious to it. You may actually be aware of it if you feel your socks going squish. You can hear them, you can feel them, but it's not your intention. The water gets reabsorbed right away. And in this case, they didn't worry about schita. However, it should be noted, once you take off the wet clothes, then they become muktzah again. The dispensation of muktzah was as long as you're wearing them, Chazal let you keep wearing them. Once you take off wet clothes are muktzah. You have to leave them there and not handle them until they become dry. The gzeira, I think, is because you may come to squeeze them, so you shouldn't handle the wet clothes once you take them off, because they're muktzah. But once they're dry, you could. But once you take off your wet clothes, you have to leave them there as long as they are still wet.